Hot off the presses, I've gotten my hands on a sample of the new Tom Ford release, Black Lacquer. I believe it is not yet for sale. I was quoted September, but department stores are starting to get testers in if you'd like to go try it. Now, you may have noticed that I'm not the biggest fan of Tom Ford fragrances. In fact, I don't own a single one, but I can still remember the excitement when he started his own brand after leaving Gucci. And interestingly, he began with fragrances and sunglasses before clothes, a kind of inversion of the usual model. I suppose this worked for him because he already had a reputation that usually one would build through the excitement of runway shows and clothing, that you then market the lifestyle through lower priced items such as fragrance and sunglasses. But it almost seems a shrewd business move that he began with the moneymakers right at the start. But it's been an interesting model, and I think it's allowed him to keep the clothing rather small and keep an air of exclusivity, because I don't really see the clothing, aside from maybe the underwear, all that widely available. Another thing to keep in mind is that he launched these with Estee Lauder. So some people have complained about Estee Lauder ruining the brand, but in fact, there was never a time in which Estee Lauder was not making Tom Ford fragrances. They were there from the start. Now, a recent development was that they sold the entire brand, including the fashion and accessories division, to Estee Lauder, and that Tom Ford himself also stepped down and got a replacement as a designer for him. But Estee Lauder has always manufactured these fragrances. Now, like I said, I remember getting walked through the line when they were brand new at Saks. If only I had the foresight to know how much many of those would be worth after they were discontinued. But at the time, they didn't particularly speak to me. And through the years, I've continued to try them, and I still feel the same way. You could say it's a major success in brand cohesion and marketing that the fragrances really remind me of the Tom Ford man. He's very formal, he's suited, a little bit cheesy and outdated in his sense of glamour and formality and sort of like unbuttoned shirt, hairy chestedness. And that just very isn't me. It reads a bit as businessman to me, a bit cheesy, a bit dated, a bit lacking artistry and creativity. That's not to say that all the fragrances lack artistry and creativity. I think as far as designer fragrances, if we consider them that, of course they're very good, but also of course their price point is not a designer fragrance price point. It's a niche, it's a designer exclusive price point, and even beyond. And I think in that price category, there's just a lot of other things I like a lot more than these. If I could pin it down to one thing, I would say it's the dry downs. I almost always find the dry downs a bit simple and a bit disappointing, a bit flat and not a lot to them. And again, I'm brushing with broad strokes here, a whole humongous collection of fragrances, so I'm sure there are outliers, but I find a similar experience with this one as well. So why did I bother to grab a sample as soon as this came out? Well, the name and the concept really spoke to me. One of my favorite things about Coromandel from Chanel is in the opening, you get a really realistic sense of varnished wood, old varnished wood. And of course, the name Black Lacquer is talking about this glossy varnish that you put on wood, which is also a big feature of the Tom Ford design aesthetic. If you've seen the interior of his stores, it's full of black lacquered wood. And I thought, well, if they really pull off a realistic varnished wood accord, then count me in. Official notes, they said something interesting about an innovation in fragrance. Keynotes of Macassar ebony wood, dark peony accord, olibanum, vinyl accord, and cedar wood. And they say that, let's find this other blurb here, a glossy, seductive, amber woody scent shines with two exclusive innovations in modern perfumery: an incandescent black lacquer accord that captures a smoky dimensional opulence, and a Macassar ebony wood note that evokes aspects of leather and birch. So I wore it yesterday, so I have a full day's wearing, and I sprayed some on again today so that I could get the dry down on my wrist of a couple hours, and I'll do a fresh spray on strip right now. So right off the bat, I do think they've succeeded at this vinyl accord. I really get vinyl, I get woods. It has that strong kind of terpenic quality to it that reminds you of sort of chemicals associated with woods, varnish, lacquer. And for that, I think maybe the average Tom Ford consumer will find the opening quite off-putting and quite difficult. Yeah, very woody, very nice. It reminds me, it smells also very familiar, although I can't put my finger exactly on what it is. If I had to guess, I would say it's probably a Comme des Garçons. They have a whole slew of wood-themed fragrances: Wonderwood, Wonder Oud, Hinoki, Palisander. There's the whole Red series, which has been discontinued, but some relaunched, were all about different trees. Although I can't think of one specifically, but probably if it's closest, I would say Hinoki. Hinoki has a terpenic quality. I believe turpentine is listed among the notes of Hinoki. I would say in comparison, Hinoki is more bright and fresh. This does have this sense of darkness, of like a deep, dark brown, almost black wood to it. So I really like the opening, although it is quite chemical in the way that these wood varnishes are chemical. Not chemical in the way of like synthetic aroma chemicals, although of course they're created through synthetic, but invoking something that smells of chemicals, like a wood shop. So that's quite nice. Again, as well done as it is, it just smells like something I've smelled. Also, I feel like every indie house has their fragrance, which is like a wood bomb, and they try to make it edgy with these extra kind of chemical abrasive elements. I would say what separates this is it's that idea just done very well and very refined, in that within just a few seconds it smells very smoothed out. I get a lot of cedar, some kind of peppery aspect to the woodiness. But as I said before, the deal breaker often for me is the dry down. And the dry down, while pleasant, it seems very simple. It seems resinous. It has a freshness to the resins that I've experienced from labdanum, but I suppose here it's mentioned as olibanum or olibanum, however you want to say it. But it just becomes a sort of soft, dark, woody, cedary thing that I feel like I've just smelled a lot. Now, a lot of Tom Fords seem to have this structure of a big bang in the beginning, and sometimes that can trick you into thinking there's low longevity because you get used to that big opening, then you have trouble smelling it a few minutes later after that dissipated. But I find that with this fragrance at least, and other fragrances, that then they start to grow back as you acclimate to them. You can smell the dry down as they go. And that's what I experienced here. I thought it had disappeared quite quickly, but then several hours later, I noticed I was still getting some wafts of this kind of vague, dark woodiness. So let's say price wasn't a factor. Would I be excited about this fragrance? I would wear it, but it's not the kind of thing, even after wearing it one day, where I really wanted to wear it again today. So even if it was half the price, I'm not sure I would add this to my collection, but that's just me. I have a feeling this one will speak to fragrance aficionados because I think it's relatively challenging, especially at the start. I also have a feeling it will be one of those that gets discontinued before long, and that becomes kind of a darling of the discontinued gems because it is rather unique and interesting within the Tom Ford range. I think if you've smelled other of Tom Ford's sort of dark woody fragrances like Ombre Leather, Tuscan Leather, you would probably not find it all that challenging because those have a similar kind of abrasive, sharp chemical woodiness to them. But the dry down is very smooth. It invokes that image I said before of like a very suave, dark suited man. And it's almost a little spa-like woods in that it holds on to that brightness. They mentioned peony coming out in the base, and while I don't smell anything particularly floral, I did notice that there is like a little bit of like a sweetness and a brightness that held on to the very base, and I suppose that's the idea of through all this dark woods and varnish and lacquer smell, you get this kind of like floral sweetness just coming up the base. So I think what they've done here is obviously very well crafted, very well like balanced and judged. To me, I feel like I have smelled this before, although the devil's in the details, as is always the case if you fall in love with this in particular. Other similar fragrances might just not do it for you because you'll still be missing that one little thing. So I recognize I've done that before where like there's a stand-in, but you still want that one because it does it just the way you like. And that's why dupes ultimately are never satisfying or a smart investment. So those are my thoughts. In the end, the dry down is a fairly simple kind of dark woody cedary resinous thing. The opening is quite a nice realistic blast of vinyl and lacquer and wood chemicals, but it doesn't last for long, and then it becomes something fairly simple and really not all that exciting to me, especially at the $400 plus price point. It's a very hard sell for me at that. So let me know if you try this and if you enjoy it and if you find it worth it.